Hello and welcome to Not Just Ads. Who doesn't remember Jess Davies, the former managing editor at Digiday Europe? Well, I caught up with Jess last week and we spoke about her role as managing editor at WorkLife, a company in the Digiday group focused on the future and obviously the present of work. She told me about what it has been moving from media and advertising onto a completely new vertical for her. And we also touched subjects very relevant to media and advertising, like building a media brand from scratch, managing a remote newsroom, identifying new target audiences, developing products to satisfy the needs and the expectations of these target audiences. We also discuss how AI is implemented in companies today, and we went down a memory lane by talking about memories of Cannes and legendary products like Digiday's Confessions series and the WTFs. I must confess, every time I meet with Jess in person is very entertaining. Always something unexpected happens. That's why I was a bit worried before starting this digital conversation. But I am sure that you, like me, will feel nostalgic when hearing this conversation. Enjoy.
Such a kind intro. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We'll have to invent something funny to happen if it doesn't happen naturally. But yeah, I loved covering media and marketing industries. Really did that for a long time, and then I went off to have my daughter. And when I came back, I needed to start on a bit more of a part-time basis for various personal reasons. And at the time, it made sense for me to take over this project. Really, at the beginning, it started as an idea where we wanted to launch something that just looked more closely at how the world of work was changing and everything. Obviously, it was such a funny time looking back now. At that time, sort of around 2020, it's sort of a bit of a distant fever dream, isn't it, now looking back? But when I came back into it during that time, it felt like everything had changed. The pandemic had sort of accelerated a lot of changes that were kind of happening already, but at a glacial pace in terms of how people were working. And obviously, when we all got thrown into remote working,
Well,
en
there you
masse,
were,
yeah,
ready
there I
to
was.
tell us about it.
There I was. Yeah. So yeah, that was the idea of it really. We thought, well, we better jump in and start, looking at this and how things are developing. So yeah, that was the plan.
And that's a very interesting story on many different levels. But are you missing anything about your old environment of media and advertising
Oh yes. I mean, mainly I
and
miss the
people?
people, obviously, like you. I do miss the people a lot. There's something a bit special, I think, about the publishing and ad community. It's very close knit, isn't it? So yeah, I do miss, calling up
Exactly.
people like yourself and asking what's going on and yeah, just sort of getting under the hood really of everything that was going on and speaking to people that were in the thick of it, trying to figure out, how to make things easier, in terms of, making revenue or all the kind of different headwinds. So yeah, I do miss it a lot.
And what is new now in your new environment? What is new for you in this future of work environment?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot really. So we took a bit of a different approach to this title. It's called Work Life. The idea was that we sort of, rode that momentum really of that time when everything was changing and everything was in flux. And we were sort of learning different. So we weren't experts in the area at all. We were sort of learning along with everyone else, which was very different to when I started at Digiday and sort of built the UK operation
But
because
also
yeah,
exciting and stimulating, I guess.
Really exciting and stimulating, totally new, and something so universal that affected everybody. So we took a different approach in that we went across sectors, which was a challenge, because obviously media marketing is very broad, but obviously, it's also very focused. So you can be very clear about how you can differentiate. Whereas with going across industries, we really had to tap like companies that we had never really spoken to before. But we found that there were these common threads, with everything. So we sort of hooked everything around certain sort of editorial pillars like leadership and talent and technology and things like that. And we were able to kind of pull out the common threads and the common set of challenges across those things. So yeah, it's been really fun.
But that's, I think, will be a very interesting conversation also for publishers, for media owners in general, because the journey has been quite varied and interesting. But going back for a second to your personal journey, so you started a new media age, then the drum, then Digiday, and a Digiday UK editor, then managing editor for Europe, then managing editor of WorkLife. So you have a long track of building teams. So what is that is more important? I mean, partially you have already answered my question. So is it subject matter expertise or is leadership?
Mm. I would say that from my experience, if you're building anything, if it's an editorial beat or a new market for an existing brand, like we did with Digiday, or a totally new brand like WorkLife, I'd definitely say that I think having some form of expertise helps you to hit the ground running faster, and you can hit on ways to differentiate quicker. But I would also say that you can learn that quite quickly if you have the right focus. So long term, I would say the leadership side, certainly with work life, as I said, we were learning on the spot and figuring out which areas to lean into and stuff. So obviously, you need to have a bit of a long-term plan, and you need to make sure that you're guiding your team in the right direction. And especially with, smaller teams like mine have been, that it's sort of quite resource tight. So you really have to figure out quickly what you're going to prioritize and what, you're going to sort of leave to other titles, because it's impossible to sort of be everywhere. And of course, don't do such a good job of trying to be everywhere. So, yeah, I would say that if you want to kind of start off quickly, then expertise does help. But I do really think that you can pick that up fast. So overall, if I had to pick between the two, probably that the leadership skills is more important for the long term stuff, and you can learn expertise once
And
you.
you touch, sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
you touch something very interesting. It's a kind of mantra I have today. I think that alignment of objectives and incentives is crucial for the future of media monetization, and to even in media and advertising, to provide quality environments. Companies need to work on different revenue channels. It's not a plug and play anymore. It's about finding an overarching objective and then having intermediate objectives covering all the different areas that will allow you to reach that objective. And I guess that's part of what you did when you started completely from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're still learning along the way and sharpening our focus in different ways. I mean, we started out quite broadly, with going a little bit out of our comfort zone.
For
Um,
example,
just trying to, well, for starters, going across industries on one title, all industries. Also, just by at the beginning, we sort of aimed everything at everyone with a job. so it had much more of a B2C vibe than the other titles in the Digiday media portfolio, which is very much sort of, B2B, but with, a sort of a better tone and style than a lot of B2B sort of titles. But this was very broad, and that was great for a time. That really worked, and we made some good cut through, particularly in the US, which is where we sort of focused. But over time, we found that there are certain things that worked really well for us at the start that are starting to kind of work a little less well. We really tapped into all the sort of social and behavioral dynamics within workplaces that had shifted as a result of, all the things that had happened. The remote working, everyone coming out of the pandemic, just all sorts of different variables. And it was really fascinating, even down to sort of Gen Z, never having been in the workplace before, and how they were having to learn to be in offices again. And yeah, that was all sort of fascinating. But we've decided now, in terms of long-term goals and sort of expanding the brand into events, which, as you know, are so crucial for monetizing and things like that, we need to have a clearer buy and sell side. And so we've started to just lean a bit more into an area of our audience that's been growing quite substantially, which is HR decision makers and sort of workforce operations decision makers, and the people really who are kind of making a lot of the changes, and decisions around the changes that have happened, with talent management, with integrating technologies like generative AI into workforces, and all that sort of stuff. So we're kind of evolving as we go, and you have to kind of remain open to doing that, right? Rather than just being like, no,
Absolutely.
this is how we started. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
This is very interesting because they all say targeting everybody equals to targeting nobody.
yes,
So that's a very interesting input, because that's what a lot of publishers go through
yeah.
or need to go through. And is it possible to have an idea on how did you look at what you were doing and prioritize the different areas?
In terms of targeting the HR audience.
Whatever way you did it. So I
Yeah,
guess
yeah,
you had a wide scope,
yeah.
and then you
So
saw that something was performing better.
yeah, so at the beginning we hooked everything around sort of six key areas really. And those were leadership, talent, culture, diversity, equity, inclusion, spaces, technology. Have I forgotten one?
I don't
Probably.
think
I
so.
don't
I
think
didn't
so. I think
count.
that's six. I didn't either. I should just rattle them off
But you
by now.
gave us
Enough of an idea.
a good spectrum.
Yeah. So those we kind of hooked everything under those, and that gave us enough places to start that, we still had quite a wide scope, but we were able to at least have some kind of anchor, because it's such a broad, the future of work, it's so broad. And obviously, there are a lot of bigger titles now that sort of write around a lot of these changes. So differentiating was getting harder and harder. So yeah, we kind of rode that wave for a little bit, and it was great. But then we just decided that really what there was, slightly less of, in terms of competition, was looking at the people internally who were having to kind of um, make decisions around how things were evolving. And we just decided that there is more space for a sort of Digiday-esque type equivalent, for HR practitioners and workforce ops practitioners who are kind of, it's been an interesting area actually, because people in those roles, they've had such a huge task over the last few years, really. Their roles have expanded so much that they now have just a lot of pressure. There's a lot of regulation, everything around AI and the AI auditing that they're having to do. All the ways that they're having to now look at trying to tie, the talent management issues to the hard business metrics, so that they're not just seen as a cost center anymore, but actually, have a very, very secure place in boardroom meetings. It's a really interesting time, I think, to sort of tap into what those people need in those roles to help them make better decisions. So that's where we're hoping that we can be useful.
And actually, it's very useful for me as well, because I didn't forecast this, but this is becoming, you are touching so many points that are crucial for a media owner, for a media brand, and the uniqueness, the differentiation, the provision of value to the audience, and understanding what the audience's needs and expectations are absolutely relevant across the two environments, your new environment and your old environment. Although at the end of the day, you are a media company, still a media company, so there is no difference. And how practically does it come to life, this strategy? So what products, channels are you using?
Yeah, so we started out, with the website, the newsletter, daily newsletter, and we've since expanded, to podcasts, and we're going to have an event in October in New York. So that will be a good kind of test bed for sort of setting up. Digiday has always been so good at creating the events, the communities.
I remember.
At
I miss
events.
them.
Yes, me too, me too. Um,
We should have
but
one.
they do have the publishing summit coming back in, I think it's October,
That's
right?
great.
In Europe. So yeah, it's been sorely missed by us as well. We loved it. It's a perfect kind of just place to catch up with everybody.
We should
Um,
repeat it anyway, even if it's not branded Digiday, as a community.
I'd love that. Let's make it happen.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned the testing. So you're testing. You have that kind of approach of testing, learning, or if it works, then you build on top of it. Is that across
Yeah.
all the products?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We always check it, if something hasn't quite worked in the way we thought or taken off in quite the way, we thought, we'll sort of readjust it. With our podcast, the first one that we did actually, and actually our most successful, but it came from sort of looking at our data and seeing what were kind of sweet spots in terms of the traffic. And this kind of just coincided with, my a reporter, Chloe, in the US, who's a Gen Zer herself, and thought it was a
I am
fascinating.
Gen Z too.
Oh yeah, I knew that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can tell.
So I
Me
can
too.
answer your questions offline later if you need some insight. Please.
Well, we'll interview you for the next one. But yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating thing as well, is just the, managing a remote team, with a different, a totally different outlook on their careers and work life, that we just didn't have in the same way. So it's been fascinating. But yeah, she, so basically we looked at the data and saw that a lot of the stories that we wrote about Gen Z and some of their challenges in the workplace were doing really well. And so we just decided, it was a subject close to her heart. So we just decided to go for it and do a bit of a narrative podcast that looked at the journey that this generation had been on, from, the stuff that they grew up with and the challenges that they had as a result, the knock-on effects, through to graduating during the pandemic, going into their first jobs remotely, all of this kind of stuff. And that, just that difference in expectations around what they want from their careers, what they expect from employers. They're more hot on the values of their employers and aligning with that. So yeah, that was how we approached that. We called it The Return because Digiday had already done a very successful initial podcast called The Return, where an agency, it was Kimiko and the Digiday team, she went to visit a specific agency as they returned to the office. and it did really well. So we just decided to, make the most of that existing listener base, sort of piggyback off it really. Helpful to have a bigger brand there to sort of help. But yeah, it just made sense to kind of put it under the WorkLife banner, given the subject matter. So yeah, that's how we went about that.
And it seems to from what you're saying that it's a constantly evolving subject anyway, because the return is not the return anymore once you have returned, right? So
Yes,
you have
absolutely.
something else to look forward to. Is anything on the horizon for new topics, new trends, if you can, if it's not a secret?
Well, I mean, the things that we really want to sort of give a lot of focus to are going to be the things that are specifically interesting for HR professionals now, and workforce professionals. So, we've done a lot of, the general content that sort of they still do really well, the stories that affect everyone, how to kind of just sort of improve your career prospects, these kinds of things. And now we're just going to be going a little bit harder on that. So generative AI obviously will be an area, because there's so much coverage on it, but there's so much sort of top line coverage on it. We want to sort of really get into the weeds on what specifically, tactically and strategically HR professionals can do with it, when it comes to anything, and the regulations around it, all of that sort of stuff. So that's one area. But yeah, there's loads. You'll have to read WorkLife. I can't go through
Oh,
them.
absolutely. Well, I do also. And I had to get ready for this episode. So I did. And actually I have a lot of questions later on, because they remind me of the past. When you say the Digiday-esque, there is a lot of Digiday-esque topics that I would like to ask you. But you mentioned AI. Actually, it's such an interesting. It's the very first time where I am the one asking the questions, and you are answering, rather than the other way around.
It's unnerving.
So you said that you mentioned AI. What's your current pulse of the situation across companies? Are companies on top of it? Are they hiring? Are they retraining? What are a good example and a bad example? You don't have to name companies, but just examples of type of companies.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely noticed that it feels like the conversation has moved on a lot from being around, the sort of anxiety around it and what it means for everyone's jobs. And there's much more of a kind of proactive sort of sense around it. I don't feel like anyone would say that they've nailed it at such early stages, but there's definitely some sort of interesting examples of companies using it. There's some big, CPG brands, for instance. I know Nestle has an internal AI assistant that it's using, and it's too early to kind of talk about results kind of thing, but it's got all its employees using this tool and trying to kind of use it to sort of improve productivity, efficiency. Those are the key things. Microsoft is quite vocal about how Copilot is being used internally to reduce sort of meeting times and just sort of make things efficient that way. But yeah, I'd say there's definitely a few more examples of companies. I know that there are some interesting things that some companies are doing, like some of the big management consultancies, using it for just as a sort of part of their learning program, so upskilling people. And there are others that are using it to kind of make their internal talent marketplaces smarter, so matching employees' skills and what available jobs there are within their business, matching them up, with sort of data that looks at what their career trajectory should look like as well. So that's quite interesting.
And I find it quite exciting to see that we have almost blank canvases in front of us, and because at the end of the day, despite claims the real experts are the ones that really know it inside out. 99% of the rest of the world, it's new or semi new to it. So it's very interesting to see how the different companies are approaching it and experimenting with it. And talking about you, you mentioned about talking about you and AI. You are managing a remote newsroom. How did you find it? Personally, I worked for a client during COVID where I basically didn't know anybody, and I had so many different stakeholders that I never met in real life, didn't know personally. It's been really, really difficult for me. And again, it's also depending on the personal experience. So how are you approaching that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I have definitely, well, for starters, it definitely helped me, unlike your scenario there, it helped coming back into a company that I'd been with for a while. So I think if I'd been starting at a new company, it
Absolutely.
might have been a bit different. Having said that, my husband started at a new company at the same time, and he didn't seem to have any issues. But,
Are you
at the
saying
time,
that I am the one with the issues? Is that you're
no,
in between the
no, no,
lines?
no, of course not, of course not. No, I mean, I'll park that. I'm sorry. Was that a faux pas? Um, but for me, obviously, because my company, that most of the employees are in the US, so for him it was a little different because they're sort of all here. So there were just cultural similarities, things like that can sort of be helpful, I think, when you're starting somewhere. But like, for instance, I remember when I first started at Digiday, I had no idea how many idioms we have in English. And I think it was a real point of amusement at the beginning, because the more I realized how they didn't translate, the more I found myself using them almost like a
You mean from
tick.
America, the American environment,
Yeah.
American environment versus
Yes. Yeah.
UK and Europe?
Yeah. Exactly.
Well,
So to start, yeah. Sorry.
no, I don't want to. I don't want to think what it must have been now, changing completely, even the sector.
Yeah, well, absolutely. That was probably the harder thing, but no, just to answer that first thing, it's definitely been a real kind of learning journey, I think, for me as a manager. So I did learn that I had to really over communicate. I thought I already did communicate quite well, but I realized after, I think sort of trying to kind of just pick up on body language and stuff as best I could through a screen, realized that actually I needed to lean in a little bit more and do a lot more than I would have perhaps done, in an office, just because I'd just be able to, turn and say something, or, they they from their perspective, from a reporter's perspective, is quite difficult as well, even for senior reporters, I think, as well as sort of more junior ones, not just hearing other reporters around you, sometimes just listening in on how someone might manage a challenging call, or how someone speaks with a PR person versus an executive within a business, or even just the differences between dealing with an external PR company versus an internal communications director. These are sorts of things that you sort of just forget that they're not innate. You sort of pick them up as you go, and it really helps, when you're surrounded by others doing it. And you have, I remember in my first job at New Media Age, well, not my first job, but the first job in digital media, writing about digital media. If there was anything, my news editor would say, by the way, next time, make sure you include this, or it was just useful. So you pick things up faster. So my guys in the US have been amazing, but yeah, it's taken from me. I've realized I've needed to kind of just give a bit more time than than I had at the start.
Well, can I say it's called the future of work?
Well, there you go.
And talking about the future, as a journalist and an important part of a media company, how do you see the future of media?
Oh, wow.
This is a very
Yes,
existential, very complex
yeah.
question.
You
But
left that one to me.
in a few words, not
In
in
a
a few.
few words. Okay, well there's less pressure on that, I guess, so that's good. Um, oh, I don't know. It's I mean there I feel like there's always some disaster about to hit, the media landscape. So in some ways, I feel like that's a good thing because we've come through things before.
Absolutely.
Um, Now, obviously, things like, well, Google's generative AI search function is the latest kind of thing to worry about, I guess, for publishers. But again, I'm positive because you still need the content to create, enough to go into these sort of AI models in the first place. So um, I do think that, you know, um, the whole diversification of revenue is going to be, possibly even more important for that reason. Things like events and things that don't rely on, those sort of homepage traffic hits and things like that. So possibly another bit of a shake up, but at the same time, it's so used to having to do that, right? It's so used to having to react to all these things, particularly from the tech platforms that come in. So I'm hoping that it just makes things stronger.
Talking about DigiDesk topics. So we were all fans. Oh, by the way, I just remember now. Do you remember your articles where
Uh,
under the screen of anonymity, you used to interview people in the
Yeah.
industry?
Oh, I loved doing those. Those are great.
Yes, and I
Yeah.
was, and once I was as well the masked interviewee.
Yes, absolutely.
That
I
was
love
fun.
those. I do remember someone saying to me once, uh, it's definitely not made up, is it? Like it's definitely real people. You haven't just made up someone that's sort of gone into the weeds on ad tech and really, really kind of got quite angry about this stuff. And I was just like, we're not that smart that we can make up this stuff. Like you've got to have some real but it did make me laugh. But people used to have a lot of fun. They'd always email me afterwards and be like, everyone in the office is talking about it, and they're sort of saying,
Did
have,
you
have you seen this? Have you seen this? And I'm having to pretend I haven't. So I think people got a kick out of it as well.
did they offer you bribes to reveal the names?
No, never, never. I
No,
think
but
people, yeah.
so you think people?
I was just gonna say, I think people would be too worried that would then happen to them. They'd never.
Absolutely. And we won't say which one I was in.
Absolutely.
But WTFs were very popular at
Mm,
Digiday.
yeah.
And looking around WorkLife, I mean, I've seen your
Nostalgic.
WTFs and I was completely lost. I don't understand anything. So we should have a look at what I noted here something. What is WTF is hay hanging.
Hey, hanging. Oh, yeah. So this is funny because yeah, I mean, formats is always something, that we look at. Digiday's always been really good on formats, taking like difficult technological topics and giving it a bit of a kind of that's where the WTFs did so well for Digiday was on tech topics. I think we'd try to, to kind of expand them out a little broader. But they've also, unsurprisingly, done really well on work life. It's a good package,
Sorry, as an interviewer, I
Yeah.
must insist you didn't answer my
Oh,
question.
I'm
Are you
coming to that.
trying to
I'm coming to
escape
that.
it?
No, not at all. So, okay, so hey hanging directly. You can edit all of that out, can't you? So hey hanging is so this is one of these areas that work life has done a lot on, that we've found has been, quite popular, and that's just things in the office, social dynamics, behavioral dynamics, things like that, toxic behaviors, miscommunications, all the kind of stuff that can happen when you're working remotely, or even on a hybrid basis. So hay hanging was something that apparently is something that in the US is used a lot in sort of digital communications, so whatever platform you're using, whether it's Slack or, Teams or whatever. And it's something where a colleague will just write hey, or a boss will just write hey, and then leave the person hanging as to what they actually want. So it's creating apparently a sort of level of anxiety for some
That's true.
people,
That's true. It happened
especially
to me.
younger
I
people.
didn't imagine that was, yes, some people do that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm sure, like, I remember having things that I would feel like that if you just got an okay, or something. I'd say, oh, you'd say, I'm just doing this, I'm changing to that, and then you'd just get okay, and you'd be there, be like, God, is that a good? So yeah, it's just like a fun thing, a fun observational thing that's happening in some offices.
Radius rules.
Radius rules, yeah. Well, that was quite an interesting one. That just happened with everything with the return to office movement. There's been like, I would say in the US, it's been more of a clash. The whole return to office. A clash between employers and employees. Here, it's sort of felt a little bit different, I think. So there's been much more sort of backlash to getting a mandate to return to the office, and more resistance. Um, and radius rules was something that kind of popped up as a term when companies were starting to put set mandates. But if you lived within a certain radius of the office, or one of the offices, then you had to come in. And if you were outside that radius, which was, say, 50 miles, you were allowed to still keep working remotely, or you had sort of exceptions to how many days you came in. So that's what that was.
Interesting. You are prepared. I mean, I will not ask you, because that was the test we did before starting to record. I will not ask you about digital twinning, because you didn't
Good.
know it half an hour ago. So I assume you won't know it right now.
Well, it's one. I mean, in my defense, that was one that actually was written on Digiday that we shared. So I didn't edit it basically, but God, sometimes
Excused.
I struggle to remember things I've written, let alone all the stuff that
Well,
was digitally written.
you
So
have written a lot of stuff. And so we are near the end of this chat, and it's that time of the year again, the time of the year when usually the phone will ring and Jess Davies will be on the other side of the phone saying, I'm writing an article on fun stuff happening in
this
Cannes
one,
in the
oh
past
yes,
editions. Do you have any stories? So I guess you know a lot of stories
so
about
many
Cannes.
stories, so many funny stories. Not just Can, De Mexico too was some
Oh
very
yes. Oh,
funny
that
stories.
was another
I was
incredible story.
sworn to secrecy on.
Do you have any stories?
Oh, from Cannes or from
Oh,
anywhere?
let's say
Oh,
Cannes. Let's keep it
Cannes.
seasonal.
Well, oh, I mean, there were some very funny ones. I not just Cannes Lion, but I used to at New Media Age. I used to go to the MIP TV at Cannes. So
Wow,
there were some. I
living
did
the
that
high
for
life.
3 years. Yeah, yeah. So great fun, but stories of, yeah, people waking up face planted, on the lawns in front of, whichever hotel was more fashionable that year. Is it still the Carlton now, or
I
I
don't
haven't been?
know. I don't know. I haven't gone since COVID.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of
But
course.
they
Oh,
were interesting stories also because of
so many.
the sorry.
So many funny stories. I do remember one very funny story, which was a few years ago now, if you want to hear it. I don't remember who even told me, to be honest. So
That's fine.
there was a funny story of someone who, I think they'd been on one of the yachts, and they'd obviously been there all day, and they somehow found their way home, but they had when they actually got home,
hopefully on the not on the water side.
I don't know. I mean, I knew countless stories of people falling in the water, being fished out. But this person arrived back with no arm on their sort of blazer jacket, because they'd had to lean against the wall all the way, because they couldn't stand straight.
Yes, I
So
guess
they lost the arm to their jacket.
I have
Anyway.
I have this memory of Cannes where everybody was half drunk or drunk in yachts and parties, and Paul Borselli, at the time CRO of Digiday, and myself at 2 a.m., like two school kids with an ice cream cone in the center of Cannes.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, there's a lot more of that now. I think it's less of, it's not quite the same level of, booze fest. I think that it used to be.
Intensity.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of options, people going for like 5 a.m. runs together and all of that. So it's a good mix now, but that's a really nice story. Honestly, it would be such a blur, that it's hard to remember, isolated.
Yes, and I have a few that are too funny, but not to be said in
Yeah,
public.
same, absolutely. But wonderful. So many wonderful memories as well, and they're not all sort of crazy. Some were just sort of really nice memories of what I loved most about it, even though it could be a bit bittersweet having to cover it as a reporter. Everyone else would be having an amazing time, and you just sort of wanted to have an amazing time with them. But you still had to actually, create the copy and things. But one of my favorite things would honestly just be sort of bumping into people that you knew having a great time, and really into a DJ or something, and you've only ever seen them in a very sort of serious setting before. And that was my favorite thing about it, just sort of seeing them getting into, Fatboy Slim or whoever was playing, and seeing a bit more of the kind of person. I loved that about it.
Absolutely. And as you said, a lot of memories, and I think you are part of our memories too. I mean, I am saying as an industry, I'm sure that many people will have loved to listen to you, to hear about your new challenges, and hearing that you are being successful. So this won't be the last time we speak. Thank you, and all the best for now.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure, as always.